My name is Jacob Fergman. I'm Nordic Principal Consultant in the Nordic business in Copenhagen. I'm sitting here with my colleague Jennifer Rowe, who's also my colleague in Nordics, covering pre-sales activities, meaning our software business. Very pleased to have you with us. There's a few household tips that I'd like to go through before we go into the session itself. As you can see on the screen, there are various navigation buttons. On the left side, you can see there's elements around the agenda and speakers. Below, you can see a button where you can meet people. And also on the right side, there's a chat function where you can get in contact with us if you have any questions you would like to address, if there's anything you would like us to elaborate further on, etc. During the session, we'll have also placed a few polls where we will ask you a couple of questions in order to understand the situation within your organization. This is very interesting for us to use as part of the conversation with you today, so we can tailor our message accordingly. Also on the right side, there's a zoom button, because we will present you slides, but also go into the software itself. And sometimes it can be helpful to navigate and zoom in to see the screen a little bit in more further detail. The agenda is as follows. Herman Peters was supposed to introduce. We had some technical issues, hence I'm doing the intro. And following this agenda walkthrough, I will go through the credit lifecycle and mention some of the current challenges we face when we meet clients in the market. Having set the scene, we will look into how we provide continuous cycle of testing and learning modules, and also how we see it work best in the market, and also with various players, both within banking and telcos. Obviously, when we're working with data and we have to test and we have to learn, we see challenges that we need to address accordingly. Here we will also provide you with a few tips on how good practice look like. In the very end, we will summarize, and if you have any questions, and I really encourage you to post all the relevant questions you may have, and we'll address them in the very end. And without further ado, I'll move into the credit lifecycle and some of the current challenges we see in the market. Particularly during COVID, we have seen a massive push towards digitizing not only the internal activities, but certainly also the external activities. This means that the number of data points has increased significantly, and we need to be able to manage this across different stages in the client relationship. Also, we need to make sure that the customers that we're working with are, when we engage with clients, they see it in a consistent way. So when they're onboarded and they suddenly become a customer, they are also approached by you and other organizations in a consistent way, and we need to make sure we have the data points and the strategies in place to accommodate that. And of course, we need to be able to proactively manage customers in distress when available data points suggest that there are changes in the individual life situation. To summarize, consistent customer management strategies and deployment is something we see as the key point moving forward. And this is not a surprise. It has always been like that, but we see the COVID situation has accelerated this push within several organizations. Then what is the credit life cycle? Well, the credit life cycle is really all the way from acquiring new customers to try to grow the activities with the customers, and also manage them in an effective way when they start to show signs of stress. So it's all about making sure we have a consistent approach with customers, also understanding that customers should not be treated in silos. There is a fine line between growing customer activities, but also managing customers starting to show signs of weaknesses. And this is very important to understand, and that is also what we would like to present with you today on how we actually do this, working from data into strategies and test and learn in that particular environment. The specific example we'll present today is around limit management. This is how we set the appropriate limit with customers given certain risk profilings and other type of profiling in a test and learn environment. And in order to do that, I'm very pleased to invite Jennifer next to me to go through the next step in the presentation.
Thank you, Jakob.
There you go.
Jakob has mentioned that within managing clients, we have the cycle of testing and learning, the ability to design and deploy your strategies, execute them in your runtime environment. And then the most important part of it, though, is the ability to evaluate those, to be able to test, learn, and improve, and within a short space of time, deploy those into a runtime environment with the confidence that they are going to produce results in line with what you're expecting. But there are challenges, and the kind of challenges that our clients are telling us they are facing are around the ability to quickly test, to be very agile in that, then to be able to see what's the difference between their expected and the results of their changes, the data that's available for them to utilize in that environment of testing and learning, the quality of the data that they have available, and the ability to fix that. Then, when they want to make a change in a runtime environment, being able to manage the impact of that in a controllable way. And finally, their ability to ongoing monitor and review what those performance is of those new strategies in the runtime environment, and then feeding back into being able to design and deploy new strategies. So the ability to quickly test is the first thing that we'll focus in on. When you are testing some kind of new strategy, you really need to be able to test it at various levels within your solution. First, at your smallest unit level of what you're making, the change that you're making. Then moving up to the next level, which might be within a subflow of processes in your system. And then at a highest level, being able to test your flow within your decisioning from start to finish within your system. As you're doing that, having that ability to test and compare your results is super important. So to actually show you a little bit, I'm going to cross into our design studio for strategy management and give you some examples of the ability to do that within our software. For those of you that have not seen our software before, just to explain that this is what we term the design studio, in this case for strategy management. And at the moment, I have open in front of you what we would call a decision process flow. So it's a flow of different activities executed in runtime and applying derivations to data, in this case, limit strategies, shadow limits, etc. All of this is managed in an environment that gives you access to maintain and change the data that you utilize, as well as other elements of your process, such as scorecards, derived data scripts, how you segment both within your trees and other areas of your system, and then what you do with that, your policy rules, your terms of business, etc. So let's start by going into this credit limit treatment object. And within this object today, there are some segmentations or splits happening on account status, on delinquency level, and on balance, as well as the utilization within of that account. There are various outcomes or treatments that are then being applied based on what you as a business would have historically decided was appropriate. So this is what we would term your unit level, your sort of lowest level that you're working on in the system. And everywhere that you go, there will be this test button that appears. This then brings up an interactive tester, which will show you what the fields are that you will need to populate in order to test this object. You could go in and capture some data in here manually, create multiple occurrences of input data and test those. But it also really helps if you create a file of data with multiple versions of test cases. So you can do that by exporting this layout into a CSV format, populating it with your data, and then importing that CSV file. So here is my input file that's been created with test data. And it has around 1,000 test records in it. I then, on the top left here, click on the Execute Test button, and can now at the bottom view the results of these tests. But now that I have created a file of data relevant to my strategy as it exists today, I'll save that as my input and results. Oh, would help if I export it. So I'm going to save that as results file. In the same folder. I'm then going to go and make a change to my strategy. So I'm going to amend the output here between where this specific split exists of current balance between 101 and 110. And I'm going to apply a credit limit at 110%. I'm also going to make a change a little lower down in my strategy, where the current balance split sits between 2,500 and 3,000. And I'm going to put a different outcome on there. I'll save that. And go back into my interactive tester. Now what I'm going to do is import my previous results as expected results. So the system will prompt me to first select my input file. And it'll then prompt me to select my expected results file. For that, I'm going to select my previous results. At the bottom, I'm just going to show me my expected. And here I will see the previous results from my tests. I'll now run a test on this object after my changes. And I'm going to click a button here to show me where the results are different from my expected results. So the system will highlight for me all of the occurrences of different results within my solution, where I can then go in and analyze, looking at both the previous result and as my expected and my current results. So that is one way within the solution to be able to compare and assess whether the results that you're seeing are what you expect. Most times, before deploying a new strategy, you would want to be able to go in and test a large file of data with a lot of records in. So for that, on the flow that you want to test, you would go and create a new test project. Now, a test project will allow you to bring in a file of data. So you will define an input data connection. And that data connection might be a CSV file, as I have utilized here. Or you could connect directly to a database and put in your ODBC settings over here. The system will then show you all of the physical characteristics that exist within your file. And on the left-hand side here are the data elements that you've defined within the dictionaries of your strategy solution. We have an auto map function that if you have already got fields in your system that are available for you to map to, it will use some fuzzy matching logic in order to suggest mappings for you. And you do not have to map all the characteristics. At the bottom here, you can see what I have mapped, but you'll see that on the top right, I've left several characteristics unmapped. So I've now defined my input data connection. I'm also defining an output folder where I can write out the results of these tests so that I can reuse them going forward. And I've also set up what that layout is that I want it to utilize when it writes out those results. I then run various tests. So I have my test buttons down here. I can just run it as a standard test, or I can select to trace pathways and be able to analyze step by step exactly what's happening as it's going through the test. So if I run it just as a standard test, the kind of outputs I would see would be something similar to what was in this first strategy, where I have a summary highlighted of the character of what's happened within that run. So it just gives me a summary of, for instance, within my collection strategy, how many of these have been allocated a value of HH, how many have been allocated a value of SS, etc. But my trace files and my log files are not completed with anything. However, if I do run something with the trace function enabled, then I get the ability to see a lot more detail with regards to what's happening in my execution of my test. So if you literally want to step through your process one by one, you will see every single value. So for each field as it goes through the system, what the value is that's been allocated to you. This becomes really helpful if you're having some problems in finding out where your issue sits in the system. Another thing that you might do is utilize an external tool, which will allow you to take your file from your original output, your files with your change, and then potentially run a compare within those tools that will highlight the records where your differences exist. Now, in order to be able to do this kind of evaluation, we've recognized that there's also some challenges that sit within the environment of testing. But before I go through into another thing, I think should we have a look at what's happening with the polls?
Yes, I think so. Excellent, Jennifer. Very interesting demo. And as mentioned in the very beginning, on the screen, there will be an access to the polls on the right side. And we encourage you to go there right now. There will be 2 questions to answer. And if we look at the first one, then I can just quickly...
Can we share this, please?
Yes, we'll share that one. If you can see the screen on the right side below event, there's a small button, polls, and there are 2 questions there. The first question is, how often does your organization assess and potentially update customer strategies based on observed behavior? And the second question is around what is seen from your perspective the biggest challenge to overcome before becoming more digitally oriented and data-driven when setting customer strategies.
We don't have a lot of answers yet.
Not a lot of answers. Let's see. If we start with the first question, I see very different maturity between organizations in the Nordic perspective. I've seen organizations almost updating strategies daily, particularly around setting some of the risk parameters, looking at what's the average interest rate on the booked accounts, how does it work with the risk, the early vintages, etc. Continuously monitor what's coming on the book, because the competitive environment is changing.
Yep.
So suddenly a new competitor is coming in, taking the good customers, and then you risk to have the adverse selection, meaning that it's more high-risk customers that the business attract. We also see some organizations have less flexibility to not even yearly be able to update strategies due to IT constraints, etc. So it's very interesting to see what the feedback from the market is in this context. But let's see. Sorry, Jen.
No, certainly, I think everybody aspires to have daily, but I see even with the few votes that we've got so far, monthly seems to be the minimum that's coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is...
we have some more votes coming through. Yeah. So annually, certainly I would say not ideal.
No, absolutely.
Ad hoc, it's nice to have that ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever there's a need. But obviously ad hoc, what does that then mean? Is it due to new business strategies, or is also market changes, etc.? So excellent that it's possible to do ad hoc activities in that space.
It is.
Right, yes. So looking at the biggest challenges, legacy systems. Any reflections on that, Jen?
Oh boy, we hear that all the time.
Yeah. And definitely, of course, banks operate with legacy systems, some back to 70s, 80s, some 90s. Very difficult to get to move to a completely new digital platform, and we do see some challenges in this space.
Interesting. I see one vote here for other.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what that was. Maybe if there's something in the chat we can check later.
Absolutely.
And the uncertainty around organizational strategy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've seen many digital strategies in PowerPoints, etc. But what does that then mean in execution on in the operational environment? That's a big step and requires a lot of work. And when the digital maturity is evolving, it's very fluid to operate in, of course.
It is, and I think this managing legacy systems talks to something I'm going to cover a little bit later as well. So hopefully I can give some hope to certain business users there.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go back to the presentation, and thank you for the answers. Very much appreciated.
So that kind of talks into the next item that's on the agenda, which is the data availability for test and learn. It's one thing to know that that data is available in your systems, and that tends to be necessary that in order to monitor and manage your strategies ongoing, you need data from various sources. The existing financial systems, from external data sources if possible, that can bring in more recent data, things like the credit bureaus historically, but also today there's data sources like open banking, which are incredibly useful for you to have an up-to-date view of how your customer base is performing external to your organization. Most of the clients that we're working now are feeding these into data warehouses. Some of them have made really great strides in getting to a big data environment that is flexible for them, that they can get what they need out of. Some of them still have an issue where although they have a new big data environment, from a business perspective, it's a slow process for them to request IT to put in place a reservoir that's relevant for their needs. So a lot of our clients have still got a separate environment for their analytical data mart, or are at least moving towards a big data environment where what they need for analysis is defined as a separate reservoir for them. We've got a few tools that we've put into our software to try and help our clients in making sure that from a runtime environment, they're able to extract the data that's relevant for them in order to be able to continually evolve their analytical data mart. The one big challenge that most people we deal with have is from this environment where they're making their changes for design, that they could create new variables or put in new scorecards that they want to monitor, but they don't want to have to change the interfaces from that system in order to feed it back, the results back to somewhere else. So what we've done is within the runtime environment, we allow you to put a setting on that creates a decision store. So you can tag within your system which elements you want to write out to the decision store. In runtime, this will then be put into a data staging area that can be moved across to the data warehouse. And this information as well is in the right format for you to be able to bring back and reutilize within PowerCurve for test projects and interactive tests that I showed you earlier. It's also possible to activate it for an entire flow, and I think it's important that if there is some personally identifiable information in there, that you're able to anonymize that and write out null values instead. So within the Data Studio, it's a very simple process where either on a specific object, you note here that you want to process the data capture, or if you want to do it for an entire flow, just click the button at the top here, which is the flow data capture. And prior to doing that, you would have defined what the data looks like that you want to write out. The other thing that we have implemented now within our solution is the ability to integrate data via REST calls directly within your decision process flow. So you don't have to be running our full origination solution, even if you are a user only of our strategy management software. You now have the ability within the Design Studio to create an object within the flow and to bring across a REST call into that object. So in order to define a REST call, though, you will need to have the Swagger code available for the interface that you are wanting to interface with, so that you can drag that Swagger code across into the definition of your REST call. This now allows you as a business user, if you need something that's important maybe for your assessment of affordability or your changes in interest rate, things like that, if you need to implement that and not go through an IT project, to be able to do that here directly within the studio and use a nice visual mapping tool in order to do that. Data quality. So data quality is another area that we're seeing a lot of issues within our clients. You know, we've seen this problem of legacy systems coming up. There's also the migration of data off legacy systems and making sure that that happens. Ideally, you want to make sure the data quality is right before you do any migrations of data. But anything that you're going to utilize within your testings of strategies, it's really important that you know what the quality of that data is. We also do have a tool available that helps. Our Aperture Data Studio, for instance, at a click of a button, you import your data file, and you can import it from various layouts. At a click of a button, your profile object will highlight a whole lot of measures within that data. everything from what is the most common type of variable within a column, what is the minimum and maximum values, what's the most common type of format. There's about 70 plus variables. It helps with things like making sure that whatever you expect is your unique key on the system is unique. And it then allows you to go in and start working with that. So you can utilize the suggested validation rules that it brings up from your profile button, where you can also set what you regard as being an acceptable percentage pass rate for each of the validation rules. It will look at what sits within the data today and recommend with those, and you can edit these before you apply them as well. That then automatically creates a workflow together with all the validation rules that you've decided to apply. And you can go in and look at which of your data records are passing, which are failing. You can analyze them by rules and go into a deeper analysis on them as well. So for instance, if I go the validation of the group results here for this original strategy shows that card style is showing as amber because one of the rows has failed the validation. I can drill down into that and see that it's got a card style with a value of N. So I would probably say, well, what was the rule that was there originally? At which point I open the validation rule results analysis. And here under card style, I can see that the rule it has been generated here is it does not have a rule from that approved list on the validation. And the rule details say that it has to have a value of C or G. So those kind of tools to allow you to evaluate and then put in place workflows that automatically fix your data. Everything from replacing nulls with your preferred values, merging data sets, comparing your results. That kind of tool is really handy so that you don't start making decisions based on data that is not ideal for your system. When you want to deploy changes as well, you want to be able to manage how you deploy those. So you want to manage the impact of your changes by deploying things in a controlled manner. In our software, we would utilize a champion challenger or test group setting where you can define various levels of champion challenger systems. You can then implement them either into a flow, where you can drag your champion challenger across. It will automatically select that your existing strategy remains your champion strategy, and you can define a completely different flow or different objects that get executed for your challenger. You can also, though, within your lower level, go into your segmented strategy and apply a different champion challenger within there as well. So you could drag across the champion challenger into your tree and apply different outcomes within your tree or your objects as well. So you might bring in a new scorecard and apply multiple scorecards. Depends on where you're working within your system. I think so the most important thing comes to how do you measure and monitor what's happening within your system. So when you go into monitoring your software, it's super important that the data that you've accumulated is then able to feed into a relevant form of reporting, something that can allow you to analyze your decisions that are occurring within the system. Analyze if you've got manual decisions overriding those, how are those then performing? Able to analyze different scorecards that you put in. And if, for instance, you will have different reason codes or policy rules, how are those being applied within the software? So today within both, already within our software as a service offerings, but even for our on-premise, we are moving towards the utilization of Tableau as the software within which we execute our monitoring. It goes back to that first poll where we say, how often can you evaluate your strategies within your systems? Yearly for us would just not be effective at all. Ad hoc might be helpful, but daily would be ideal. That at any point you can go in and assess, how is my strategy performing? What do I need to go and evaluate and improve on? There are other tools within our software that we utilize as well, and those will be covered later in one of our later webinars, which Jakob will refer to. But before we actually get to that, perhaps, Jakob, would you like to go through a bit of a summary?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks a lot, Jennifer. Very insightful presentation, both on PowerPoint, but certainly also within the software to see how does it actually look in real life when applying test and learn environment activities. I hope it was helpful for all of you to understand what it actually means to operate in that environment, to walk the talk, to use data accordingly in order to optimize and continuously manage your strategies towards customers, not only in origination, which has been a key topic for many, many years, but certainly also within customer management and early collection activities. We have shared a few examples here with regards to some of the benefits we have worked with clients around in terms of optimizing certain parts of the credit life cycle. As you can see on the slide, with the European Bank, we have seen a 40% increase in acceptance rate by making sure we use data to optimize strategies. Also, to improve operational efficiency, we have seen with a bank in the Netherlands a significant decrease in number of FTEs because we are able to improve the productivity in the business. Also, as Jennifer correctly said around data quality, what does it actually mean in benefits to make sure that the data we actually operate with is good? And we have worked with the European Bank and done up to a 10 times improvement on the data quality in that space. On customer management activities, we have looked into a significant increase in profit, but also in using the product. If we just look at credit card facilities or other similar products, we all know that dormant accounts is a cost burden to banks and operations, and we need to make sure we target our customers in the appropriate way with either upsell or cross-sell activities to make them use the products even more. And then also make sure they spend a little bit more at the same time. And with good clients, let's make sure they have the appropriate limit that fits the risk profiling, but also the profitability profiling.
Should we just check if there's any
questions? Yes, let's go to the questions section if any questions have been raised. I don't see any questions, but I have a question to you, Jennifer.
Oh dear.
Jennifer has worked in almost all markets across EMEA, all the way from South Africa to Europe, and now you are in Nordics.
I am.
What is your reflection on the maturity of banks to be able to walk the talk, use data in a test and learn environment? And what would be your number one advice to banks considering to move more effectively into this space?
It varies a lot. In some of the markets, your more established banks are very hamstrung through the legacy solutions and the historical reliance on IT to be able to make changes and manage data. But in some of the markets, the banks, even your more very established and big banks, have had a really strong roadmap towards improved systems and big data. And where they've done that, those banks have put in place teams of individuals whose focus is very much, what is happening in the strategies today and how can I monitor and improve them. So as part of that roadmap, some of those big banks have put in place a really good structure internally. I could give an example, Standard Bank in South Africa. They actually took a step back and reviewed their internal structure because they realized they were on a path to improve the tools, but their structure internally and the way they worked might not have been optimally giving them that ability to utilize it. So it's something to keep in mind that you might need to review internally. What's the structure of the organization? Have I got the right people with access to the tools that I've bought? And have I improved my internal process so that IT individuals trust when these people, the portfolio heads, for instance, are making changes to the strategies and say, I want to make a change, that there's a level of trust that allows them to deploy that to production quickly. Well, definitely the new to banks and markets, the digital banks that are evolving and are evolving very quickly now with the increased trust in digital coming from COVID, are challenging established banks. So where the established banks are not putting enough focus on the tool set and internal organization to be agile, there is a major threat that's coming through from the new to market digital banks. A lot of them, though, are focused first on things like unsecured lending, but then they will tend to transition into taking deposits, often through offering extremely competitive rates. And then over time, suddenly they become a highly competitive bank, which then either evolves into a full product space or partners to be very competitive across a full product space. So I think the message is that if your organization is not on a very strong roadmap to have big data environments, to have those in a way that your analytical teams can have access to them and be able to work with the right data effectively, and does not have a relationship internally that trusts that when your business users make changes, they can be deployed without breaking something, then your organization is going to be under extreme pressure to compete. That's really what I've been seeing across multiple markets. And APAC is showing some of the best advancements in terms of utilizing the common tool sets across the entire life cycle. And even your more established banks like ANZ are being able to be really flexible, agile right across the entire life cycle now by having taken that approach and implemented into that space.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jennifer. Should we just have a look to see if there's any more questions popping up on the screen? Any follow-up questions potentially on this one?
Oops.
Right,
Okay.
yes. Should we just read the question from Martina? Monitoring functionalities, are these available with Designer with Analytics license? And they are using Strategy Design Studio version 2.8. Is the presented functionality available there? Good question, Martina. Thank you.
Martina, I'm assuming that sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing so we don't see my weird background there. I'm assuming that you're running this as an on-premise solution today and not as software as a service. And our on-premise solutions historically would not have made use of the monitoring that I showed you today. That has been made available now with the on-premise moving from version 2.13 onwards. It is available today with our software as a service offering. And whether or not it's available with Designer Analytics license will depend on contract. So some of our clients included the monitoring into our historical monitoring tools into their licenses, and some of them didn't. But you're welcome to engage with us offline, and we'd be happy to discuss that going forward, as well as if you want to then move to a later version and be able to use those the latest monitoring that comes with all those standard Tableau reports, what it would take to get you there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think also as a cliffhanger to the upcoming webinars in the Power Curve series, we can just move to the next slide.
I'll share that back.
All right. Because we have a number of more Power Curve series presentations coming up over the next 1.5 months, where we go more into detail in different places in the credit lifecycle, being originations when we acquire new customers. How do we manage then customers when they're onboarded? And how do we manage customers in distress in the early collection activities? Then we'll go into more depth with strategy management part 2. And then finally in October, 20th of October, we'll present the Power Curve roadmap as it looks like right now, because we also know the world is fluid, it evolves, hence also our software suite evolves, and we would like to share some of the new insights and new things that is on the way coming up in the next few years. Lastly, but surely, AI and machine learning is something all talk about, maybe more difficult to integrate in real life activities. And we'll show you how that is done within the system, how to make sure machine learning models can be executed within the software. I really look forward to be part of these activities and share the knowledge and experience that we have. And we hope to see you with those sessions as well. And your feedback is very much appreciated. And I really hope it was helpful. And any feedback is more than welcome to make sure that we cover all the angles you expect and hope for in this setting. Any final words from you, Jennifer?
No, I think that you have covered everything. Thank you, Jakob, and thank you very much for attending.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll give you 12 minutes back of your time today and look forward to see you again in the near future. Thank you.